Hello, and welcome to a special requested episode of A Nice Cup of History. This week, we're going to talk about the epic Old English poem Beowulf. We'll start with a lowdown of who the main players are, a bit of historical context, and then we'll give you a synopsis of the poem itself.
And for our ridiculous death, we look at why you might need to check twice before sitting on the toilet seat. So, grab yourself a tankard of mead, join us around the fire, and let's get historical.
What? Wigedina ingerdegum. Thiorkininga thrim gefrunon. Dutha ethalingus ellen fremedon.
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
If you were sitting around a fire, or in a mead hall around 900 years ago, you are likely to have heard that phrase.
Probably better spoken.
I don't know, I think you did well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you knew that you were in for a treat.
That is the opening line of the Old English epic poem Beowulf. Old English was a version of English spoken and written between roughly 450 to 1150 CE/BC, AD even, AD, no, after, yeah. It phased out slowly after the Norman conquest in 1066, but there are some words that have survived into our modern version of the language.
Yeah, and at the time, epic poems and stories were often told by word of mouth. Literacy was not massively common outside of monasteries and the upper classes, so many of them have not survived the centuries, having been lost to time and memory.
We are lucky, however, to have a surviving written copy of Beowulf, which is probably why it's the most popular example of its genre. Not because it's it is epic, but because it's the only one we've got.
Yeah, definitely. But what makes it even more remarkable is that it survived in its original format and is only one written manuscript, imaginatively called the Beowulf manuscript.
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't write that much, so I guess they could, utilise the words they can write.
Yeah, this is true. It's Beowulf. It's called Beowulf. Okay, why is it called Beowulf? It's about Beowulf. Cool. What do you call the book? Beowulf manuscript. Why? Because it's got Beowulf in it. The manuscript itself isn't dated, but handwriting analysis has indicated it was probably written down somewhere between the end of the 10th century CE and the earliest part of the 11th century CE, which makes it roughly 1,000 years old. That's one old book. Though the date of the first telling of the poem is something we'll probably never know.
Yeah, the manuscript contains a couple of other works as well, including a homily on St. Christopher, the Marvels of the East, the Letter of Alexander to Aristotle, and another poem called Judith. But Beowulf is by far the most popular part of said manuscript.
The manuscript itself passed through the hands of a number of owners since its creation, but there's only a few well-known names. So Lawrence Nowell, who studied Old English in the 1560s, we know he owned it because he wrote his name at the top of the first page, with a date. I mean, yeah, it's graffiti, but at the same time, it gives us a historical record of where this went.
Ah, that's what I did in all my school books then.
Yeah, so, in a couple of 100 years' time, someone will be like, Emily Bush, use this.
She did.
Yep.
She used this back in 2004.
Yep. So he wrote on the first page. We know that it then passed to the ownership of one Sir Robert Cotton, along with a couple of other priceless documents, including 2 copies of the Magna Carta.
That's cool.
This then passed through his family until his grandson, Sir John Cotton, bequeathed the library collection to the nation after his death in 1702. The Cotton Library is now one of the founding collections of the British Museum and later the British Library. So thanks to the Cottons, we have a lot of stuff, including the original manuscript of Beowulf.
That's something.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, the poem is in 2 parts and is, at its heart, a tale of heroism, monsters, revenge and loyalty. Each of the enemies are monsters, and studies that have been carried out over the centuries have dwelled on this point. As Beowulf is fighting against the forces of evil and enemies to civilization as a whole, rather than against other men, which could lead to, blood feuds and revenge cycles.
Yeah, which makes it quite interesting compared to some of the other sagas, though the manuscript itself didn't quite survive unscathed through the centuries.
Yeah.
Whilst in safekeeping at Ashburnham House at Westminster, disaster nearly lost it forever. On the 23rd of October 1731, a fire broke out, destroying a few manuscripts and damaging many more, including the Beowulf manuscript. And over the years, mishandling has made some of the fragile pages crumble, and even now it's encased in paper frames and can only be handled with utmost care and remains in the British Library.
Oh, wow.
So, because of that, because of how fragile it is, and because of how important it is about like the different type of revenge it is, rather than compared to some other cycles, it's so fragile that it can only be viewed through paper, through glass and everything. It's crazy.
That's definitely the one you wear the white gloves for.
Yes, definitely. And like use the little pincers. Just move it ever so carefully, and no oops moments.
I should not go anywhere near it.
Yeah. Probably not. No. Actually, no. Definitely not. The idea of the revenge cycle, though, the fact that it is against monsters rather than humans, it does give Beowulf a more hopeful and lighter ending than some of the more traditional Norse sagas. So, for example, the Curse of the Volsungs, that's a blood feud saga where generation after generation takes up the feud until they are eventually wiped out. There's like people getting eaten by wolves, killed by dragons, and blah blah blah. And they all just get wiped out. Beowulf doesn't necessarily have a happy ending for the hero itself, but it's nowhere near as fatalistic.
Which is nice to read sometimes.
Yeah, it has a potentially good moral to it, and like a potentially nice ending, but also some people have read too much into that as well, maybe.
There is a heavy influence of early Christianity in this poem, however. Christianity came to England in the 1st century CE, but it wasn't really until the arrival of St. Augustine in 597 CE that it was organised and became more widespread, until taking over as the dominant religion of the country. It's possible that Beowulf may have changed over the years to reflect this, and whilst we'll tell the story, we'll avoid over-egging the Christian bits that mention the glory and goodness of the Almighty. If you want to read those bits, you can access any numbers of translations.
Yeah. So, that's a background on the poem, the manuscript, what we know about it. So let's get down to the story itself, shall we? Starting with who the main players are.
And I will do my normal disclaimer. Apologies if I pronounce things wrong.
That's fair.
But I can do this one.
Yep.
Beowulf. Well, it wouldn't be the story of Beowulf without him, would it really? He is the main protagonist and hero of the piece, from Gretland, which is modern-day Sweden. His name means Beowulf, or bear, and he is the typical hero. Brave, boastful, clever, loyal to his family and the Lord, the whole shebang.
Yeah. Then there's Hrothgar, the king of the Danes, who owned the mead hall Heorot, where all the trouble starts. He's considered a brave and just ruler, and this kind of ruined it for me a little bit when I found out.
Oh yeah, you messaged me and you were like, never guess.
Yeah, the name has been translated into modern English as Roger, which makes him seem a little impressive somehow. Beowulf, the great Beowulf, the bear, going to help King Roger.
Yeah, no offence to anyone named Roger, but it's just Hrothgar has more of a, I don't know, if you say it in a certain way, it could instill fear into his enemies.
By the same token, if your name is Roger, you can now legally, technically go by Hrothgar.
That's cool. Well done, Hrothgar.
Cool. We love you, Hrothgar.
Yes. And next is Grendel.
Yep.
The first villain of the piece. Grendel is a creature, sometimes a troll, sometimes a swamp monster, sometimes something else. In the manuscript, he is described as a demon descended from Cain, who was the first murderer. This is a very Christianised approach with the whole Cain and Abel thing.
Yeah. Grendel's mother is the second villain of the piece. She isn't actually given a name and is described as some form of monstrous swamp hag, which, let's face it, how else would you describe your mother-in-law sometimes?
No comment.
She's somehow, however, even though she's a swamp hag, she's somehow less human than her son, and she is hell-bent on revenge against Beowulf.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's hardcore then. Then we have the dragon. Again, unnamed, and the final villain of the piece. He guards a treasure hoard, as, all dragons should.
Yes. Then there is Shield Sheafson. He's only mentioned at the start of the poem, but he's actually worth a mention here. He's an ancestor of Hrothgar who progressed through his skill, bravery and strength from being an orphan to being a king, and is hailed as a good example of what a king should be. So it's kind of mentioned at the beginning to give, to give Hrothgar a sense of, this is who he is, this is how good he is, this is his lineage, all hail Hrothgar.
Fab. And then we've got Beo, who is son of Shield and the father of Healfdene, grandfather of Hrothgar. Again, mentioned only briefly as a way to show Hrothgar's impressive lineage and as an example of what a warrior king should be.
Yeah. Then you've got Halfdan, father of Hrothgar, Hrothgar, and a daughter that doesn't get named. He's king of the Danes and, yet again, mentioned as an example to the listener and to try and give some form of historical context to the story to make it more believable as true. So it's like, this is so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, So you can, at the time, you would know these names, so you would know when this was set, who this was set, etc.
There's no way I'm doing that.
I'll do the next three.
Cheers. Yeah.
There's Wealhtheow, who's the wife of Hrothgar and queen of the Danes, and she supports Beowulf in his helping them. She's not really massively mentioned in our version of the poem, but she is given a bit more exposure in the animated film Beowulf, starring Ray Winston and Sir Anthony Hopkins. She's given a bit more context in that she cheats on Hrothgar with Beowulf and she ends up marrying Beowulf, and it's just like, no. No, but it's cool. No, it's a good telling of the story. It just takes a lot of liberties.
Oh yeah.
Then there's Hughlach, who is king of the Geats or Yeats, because you don't pronounce the G technically, so it's called Yeatland, and they're Yeats, as in throw Yeet. That's how I remembered it. So Hughlach is the king of the Yeats and uncle to Beowulf, and then there's Ecgtheow, father of Beowulf, who's dead at the start of the poem, but he is the reason that Hrothgar and Beowulf are linked, because Hrothgar previously saved Ecgtheow's life, so Beowulf owed him a debt of loyalty. So if someone saves your life during this time, you then owe them a life debt. You have to serve them until your life debt is owed. So either you save their life or you do something massive for them. But because Ecgtheow then died, Beowulf owes that debt to Hrothgar.
Wow.
Yep.
That's cool. So, the poem itself.
Yeah.
So, they were the main players, and so now we're going to go into the story. This takes place in the wild lands of Denmark and Sweden. This particular part of Sweden is called Yeatland, as you said before, and at the time, and the people were the Yeats.
Yeet.
It didn't become...
I'm going to resist, sorry.
Are you done?
Yep, I'm done.
Okay,
Seriously.
so it didn't become the Sweden that we recognise until much later, but it is important to have a bit of context to the places as well as the people.
Yeah. The poem opens telling the story of the great Shield Sheafson, or Skjöld Skeffing, and how he started life as a forlorn orphan and through great deeds of valour and strength fought his way to the crown until everyone near or far knew of how great he was and the deeds he had done. He was a good and brave warrior king, beloved by many, and in the fullness of time he had a son and heir, Beo.
Yep, Beo grew to be as renowned as his father, succeeding to the throne when...
Shield,
okay. Passed away, giving him a glorious sea burial, as was due to Shield, as the great warrior king that he had become. They lay him in a great ship, surrounded by treasures and precious objects from near and far, as well as great weapons of war that would befit such a great warrior. And above his head, flying high, was a set as standard of gold, and the ship was launched out so that the ocean could receive their beloved former king with all the grace and majesty that he deserved. The people mourned him deeply, and his loss was felt far and wide.
Are we getting the hint that he's great yet?
I think so. I mean, I'm going to need some more proof.
Well, let's talk about his son, Beo.
Cool.
Beo was as beloved and just a ruler as his father, and it wasn't much longer before he had his own son and heir, Halfdan the High, lord under his father, the king who grew into an equally imposing warrior.
Why were they always something of...
Because
like Halfdan the High, and you had Ivan the Boneless. Why did they
didn't
have
technically
the
have surnames, so to speak. You were identified as, like, Beowulf, so he would be Beowulf Skildson, or Shieldson. You would be the son of, or the daughter of your father. So you would be like Emily Kevin's daughter. Or it would be Carrie Dave's daughter. Yeah, you'd be known as the child of your parent.
No one wants the name Kevin in their name. Not really.
I'm dating someone called Kevin. I can't really talk.
I mean, no one's called Kevin under the age of 50.
Looks at the baby and says, Kevin.
Sorry, Dad.
Sorry, Kevin. Sorry, Kevin. Both Kevins. Papa K and my Kevin. God. How did we get off track already?
Heft in the high. I
Heft
just
in the
wondered
high.
why they
Yeah,
were called something.
So you get
something.
a moniker if you did really, really good stuff. So you'd be like Emily the Creative.
Huh?
And I'd be Carrie the Dork.
Yes.
Or Carrie the Funky Foot.
Or the writer. You have books.
This is true. Carrie the Wordsmith.
There you go.
There we go. Rather than Carrie the Crip. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Sorry. So yeah, you'd have those names. This is descended. You would have those names that would mark you out as someone important. So if you had a "the" after your name, you were pretty important. You'd done something cool.
Cool.
So
Unless you're Bran the Broken.
I mean, he survived a fall from a tower,
Yeah. That's all he did.
and then he just sat there staring into space.
That's literally all he did.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that. In time, Halfdene fathered 4 children: Hrothgar, Hrothgar, Halga the Good, must have been a nice guy, and an unnamed daughter who grew up to marry and become a queen in her own right. The others are kind of forgotten after this point, but Hrothgar isn't. Let's just, look at his impressive lineage and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm. Hrothgar grew into a great warrior who won himself many accolades and much fame in battle, to the point where his people followed him loyally and without question. In time, his loyal men grew into mighty company that were renowned for their bravery and skill.
Yeah, everybody is awesome.
Everyone is awesome.
Everyone is cool when you're fighting for the king. Yep, that just
I'm
happened.
sorry, we have descended into madness.
I don't know what's going on here. Right, okay, serious face now. Serious, we're telling a story.
Yes.
Eventually, Hrothgar decided to reward his men and capitalise on his renown by building a massive mead hall, such as never been seen before, and he called it Heorot. It was a marvel, and people came from miles around to feast and celebrate the might and glory of Hrothgar in his magnificent mead hall. Heorot became almost as famous as Hrothgar, and his generosity was far known. He would give rings that honoured people, great gifts and treasures at these feasts, which promoted the loyalty that his stature and story were already owed. So, just as a little bit of context, when we're saying rings, we don't mean like rings on your fingers. You get arm rings, and you get specific arm rings with designs on relating to specific lords. So if a lord favoured you, you did really well, he'd give you an arm ring, and that's just to say, you know what? You're a solid man, mate.
That'd be something we should have now.
Yeah.
Just so we can, weed out the goods from the dickheads.
Yeah, just get a good arm ring, or a nice bangle, Everybody likes a bangle.
Yeah. I mean, fact.
Yep. So, yeah, massive, massive feasts.
Yeah.
Big parties, lots of noise.
But not everybody was happy about Heorot and the parties there. Nearby dwelt a monster called Grendel, a twisted and terrible creature who couldn't bear the noise of the parties around him, the singing and the laughter. The happiness of humans was like torture to him.
One night, after a particularly loud feast, Grendel decided that enough was enough. He ventured forth from his marshy home and headed, skulking in darkness, towards the great mead hall of Heorot.
The feast had died down at this point. The hearth fires were burning out and the music had stopped by the time he reached the mead hall. Hrothgar and his retinue had retired to their sleeping quarters. The rest of the guests were lying, sleeping in the mead hall, as you do, drunk and satisfied from the good feast. That was the scene that greeted Grendel as he arrived. So everyone was asleep, everyone was chill, fires were burning down.
Nice, relaxed atmosphere.
Calm.
He smashed through the door and attacked, snatching up no less than 30 men who had been sleeping peacefully within, tearing them limb from limb with his teeth or his bare hands, coating the walls with their blood, their screams only serving to build him into a further rage.
When he had had his fill, before the sun could rise, Grendel turned and ran back to his home, looping across the landscape in the pre-dawn light.
Next morning, his strength and brutality were obvious to the people who found the horrific sight in the mead hall. Broken, torn bodies strewn across the room, blood and viscera everywhere, traumatised survivors unable to speak. The sight, the smell, it was horrific, and Hrothgar's heart broke.
A search was taken up for the monster, but he was not found. That day the bodies were buried, the hall was cleaned, and that night a sombre funeral feast was held. Not the best idea, as noise is still noise, and Grendel did not like noise. He wasn't a fan.
Night after night Grendel returned, killing and brutalising before running away before the sun rose. The only person he would not touch was Hrothgar himself, which was torture to Hrothgar, seeing his men die in such a horrific way night after night whilst being powerless to stop it. Eventually, Hrothgar could take it no longer, and he closed the doors of the mead hall Heorot, nailing them shut and vowing that no happiness will come to Denmark as long as Grendel lives.
For years, the Daves... The Daves? Only people called Dave would live in fear.
The terror of the Daves.
For years, the Danes, they lived in fear of this monster, not knowing when or how he will attack, afraid to show any happiness or celebration lest they bring the monster's wrath down on them again. They can't afford to lose any more men. The story of Hrothgar and his terror spreads. Many come to try their hand to free him and his people from Grendel, but they always end up in the same way, in pieces the next morning.
It's not going well, is it?
Not great.
Eventually, the story reaches a place called Geatland, ruled by a guy called Hugelac. His adopted nephew Beowulf hears the story and he wants to help. Many years before, Hrothgar had saved the life of Beowulf's father, Ecgtheow, and in doing so had incurred a life debt from him and his family. Ecgtheow had died in battle previously whilst Beowulf was a child, but that debt was still owed, so Beowulf went to his uncle, King Hugelac, and asked for a ship and 14 men to accompany him so that he could help Hrothgar and repay his father's life debt.
14, very specific number.
Yeah.
Beowulf arrives to the sorry state of this once magnificent mead hall, being left to go to ruin in one of the saddest settlements he'd ever seen. It was clear to him how badly the people had been affected by this monster, and it was also clear that something needed to be done.
See, Beowulf had already made a name for himself with brave deeds and battles, and remembering his father as well, Hrothgar was happy to have him there to help. And even if he had only brought 14 men with him, Beowulf did manage to persuade Hrothgar to open the mead hall, Heorot, and have a feast. Hrothgar was, obviously, reluctant, but he was also aware of how awesome Beowulf was, and frankly had nothing left to lose. So he opened the hall, and a great feast was held, such as had not been seen in Heorot for years. Drink flowed and stories were told, which is a bad combination for testosterone-fueled blokes.
Yeah, eventually things started to get a bit heated, and a guy called Unferth, who was jealous of Beowulf getting all of this attention, decided to insult him by saying that he is unworthy of his reputation. This didn't go down so well, so it's time for a boast battle.
Boast battle! Boast battles were a big thing back then. It was... You boasted about all of your good deeds, and even if you embellished them and made them a little bit ridiculous, the more you boasted, the better you were at it, the cooler you were.
Yeah.
So, Beowulf launched into stories of his past battles, encounters with sea monsters, fought naked while swimming exhausted in the ocean. Really ridiculous things that would be unbelievable if he wasn't Beowulf.
Fact.
Every story lifts the hearts of the people around him and builds their confidence in him, especially when his own people chime in to say, it was true, I was there, totes saw it. Basically, I said totes,
Keep going.
feels dirty. Basically, the great Beowulf became the awesome Beowulf and everybody knew it. And Unferth was pretty much turned away with his tail between his legs.
Yep. Things get rowdy, the feast gets louder and lasts late into the night, so you know full well who is on his merry way.
Eventually, things die down and everyone drifts off to their designated sleeping areas. Beowulf and his men hunker down to sleep in the middle of the mead hall. All is quiet, and still the fires go down and everything goes dark.
Then the door bursts open once more, and the massive, grizzled shape of the monster Grendel fills the doorway, lit only by moonlight and the light from his burning demonic eyes that were filled with rage and focused on the now very much awake Beowulf.
Grendel roars terribly and attacks, and they fight. Beowulf is unarmed, but proves more than a match for Grendel. Eventually, Grendel realises he's not going to win, so he plans to strike one more time and make a run for it. But Beowulf catches his arm and grips it tightly. Grendel panics and tries to run away, but Beowulf is too strong and he won't let go. In desperation, Grendel pulls and pulls, but Beowulf grips tighter and twists until eventually he tears the creature's arm right off.
And with an ear-shattering howl of pain, Grendel flees, bleeding as he runs. He barely makes it back to his swamp home before he succumbs to his injury and dies. Beowulf has won, Heorot is safe, the monster is dead. End of the story, right?
Wrong. The next morning, there is a huge celebration, and Grendel's severed arm is nailed above the door of Heorot as a trophy to remind everyone that they are now free of the evil that has plagued them for years. Nothing says freedom like a severed arm.
Well, no.
Beowulf is hailed as a hero, and he and his men are showered with gifts. The doors of Heorot are flung open once more, and a feast such as hadn't been seen there in years, bigger than the feast that before hadn't been seen there in years, is held. Music and laughter ring out late into the night, providing a beacon for what is coming next.
You see, Grendel didn't just spring out of the ground all the dark fears of men. Nay, nay. Even the vilest creatures are born, which means even the worst of monsters have a mother. It was Grendel's mother, maddened by rage and grief at the murder of her son, that was now racing with inhuman speed towards the fires and the laughter of Heorot. They had murdered her son, and they were celebrating it. You can only imagine the howl of pain that she bit back at seeing Grendel's arm hanging proudly above the doorway.
There was no need to open the doors. They hadn't been closed. The people had nothing to fear, or so they thought. In her rage, she takes the person nearest to the door and tears him apart, vowing to come back the next night and do the same, again and again, until all but Hrothgar were dead, so that he would feel the same pain that she was now feeling. Before the sun rose, she retreated to her swamp, clear in what she was now going to do.
The next morning, the scream rang out and the broken body was found.
It was Eshere, one of Hrothgar's dearest friends.
Yep, and most trusted advisors. Hrothgar was heartbroken, and Beowulf vowed to find out who or what had done this, and seek revenge on behalf of his dear friend, Hrothgar. So, the cycle begins.
Yep, it's just basically, Grendel comes and fights, Beowulf gets revenge on Grendel for the fighting, Grendel's mother gets revenge, kills Eshere. Beowulf gets revenge for Eshere. So on and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A hunting party is organised with Beowulf and Hrothgar at the head, and they follow the creature's tracks back to her lair. The swamp is deep, but the tracks clearly lead into the water, and so Beowulf volunteers to go in alone and face this creature.
He's badass.
Yep. Before he goes, Hrothgar gives him one final gift, a beautiful sword with which to kill the beast. Beowulf accepts the gracious gift and wades into the lake. Eventually the water's up to his chest, and, taking a deep breath, he dives. The lake is deep, but there is a small opening in the bed of the lake. Beowulf gathers all his strength and swims into the opening, following it to an underground cavern. He emerges silently from the water, creeping through the near darkness, until, sitting sobbing by the light of the small fire, he sees her. He attacks, but she overpowers him and knocks him back, the sword flying from his hand.
Beowulf scrambles to get away from the advancing creature until his hand comes to rest on a huge sword, so big it must have been forged for a giant. Using what little strength he had left, he hefts the sword and swings it as well as he can, cleaving the monster in two, and once again saving the day. Looking around the cavern, he finds Hrothgar's sword and also the body of Grendel. He uses the giant sword one more time to cut the head off Grendel, and, attaching it by what passes for hair to his belt, he dives once more into the lake.
Hrothgar and his men wait on the shore, sometimes pacing, sometimes sitting, the horses getting restless. So much time passes that Hrothgar feels his heart start to sink. There is no way Beowulf could have survived that long. Suddenly, a shape is spotted in the water, distorted by the murky depths. Hrothgar calls for his men to be ready, sure that it's the creature coming to claim the rest of them.
The surface of the water broke, and a head emerged, swimming towards them. It wasn't until the thing reached shallower water and was able to stand that they saw who it was. Beowulf, covered in muck and blood, the decomposing head of Grendel at his belt, Hrothgar's sword in his hand also emerged, I'm guessing really rather majestically, from the lake. And a huge cheer went out amongst the hunters. They were safe. It was finally really over. I'd like to think that Hrothgar forgot his kingly composure and embraced the sopping wet Beowulf warmly, almost fatherly tears in his eyes, before telling Beowulf to keep the sword. He had earned it.
Yeah, keep it. Even though the sword actually did him no favours whatsoever in the battle, keep it. Yeah. That night, a huge feast, bigger than any before, is held. and Beowulf is praised almost like a son to Hrothgar. Yeah, like the crowd's cheering, the fire's going, the mead's pouring, everything's epic. After another couple of nights pass without incident, because, you've got to make sure. Yeah. All is declared peaceful at Heorot, and Beowulf, his ship now laden with treasure, bids a tearful goodbye, and he and his men head home to Jutland. His fame travels ahead of him, and he's given a warm welcome at home by his king Hugelac, to whom he tells the epic tale of what has happened in Denmark. Beowulf, loyal to his king as a good warrior should be, hands over the majority of his treasure to Hugelac, keeping back some to pay his brave companions and a little for himself because, he killed 2 monsters, man. Hugelac totally gets this and gives Beowulf his own rewards, and so ends the first part of the poem.
Yep, but for now it's time to stoke the fire, top up your mead horn or teacup, and have a quick toilet break. We will return with the second half of this poem in just a moment's time. In the meantime, why not have a listen to another podcast that we think you might just be interested in?
My name is Cindy Burnett, and each week I interview at least 2 traditionally published authors on my podcast, Thoughts from a Page. We talk spoiler-free about their books, so you can listen whether you have read the book or not. And then we delve into things that you most likely won't hear about anywhere else. The importance of the cover design, why they included various aspects of the story, personal details about both the books and the authors' lives, and so much more. You can find the podcast on every major platform and learn more about it on my website, thoughtsfromapage.com. Thanks so much for checking it out.
Welcome back to the second part of Beowulf. We hope you're all suitably refreshed and ready to dive back into the epic life of an old English legend. Good? Let's begin.
Many years have now passed, and the once great King Hugelac is no more, having died bravely, obviously, in a battle against the rival Scilfings. Beowulf has ascended to the throne of Jutland and, for the last 50 years, has ruled wisely and brought prosperity and fame to the land. Though the years have taken their toll, there is no mistaking the strong, tall, and undoubtedly handsome man he once was. The hair may be white and the skin wrinkled, but his strength has not failed him yet, and he is still an imposing presence.
However, all good things must come to an end, and this is as true for heroes and legends as it is for you and I, and the greed of man knows no bounds.
One day, a thief stumbles on a barrow, a burial mound, and inside is a deep cavern filled with treasure. Old treasures of a beauty that had never been seen, as though crafted by the elves and the old gods themselves. It's too much for the fragile will of the thief, and so he decides to make off with what he can carry and come back for the rest. So he reaches down and picks up a jewelled chalice, so beautiful that he's completely entranced by it, not noticing the large eye that is now staring at him.
Slowly the eye blinks, taking in the sight before it as the brain behind the eye gradually wakes up. The dragon has been in safe slumber for many, many years, but now it is awake, and someone is trying to steal what it is guarding. Flexing its spine sets off a chain reaction, and the million of gold coins covering his back begin to shift and fall, alerting the thief. Now he sees the eye, and for a split second he is frozen in terror. But his flight response overtakes all other impulses, and he runs, faster than he has ever ran before, through the door of the barrow and out into the cold night air. As he runs, the moonlight above glints off the chalice still in his hand, advertising its foolish crime for miles around.
With an almighty roar and a crash, the barrow explodes behind him, dirt and bones spraying everywhere as a huge shadow shoots up into the starry sky like an arrow. It seems to hold for a moment, suspending in mid-air as time freezes. Then the wings open, vast wings that easily blot out the light of the moon, casting a shadow over the hapless thief. But it isn't dark. The last thing our poor thief sees is a jet of flame heading straight for him.
Enraged at the gall of humans for disturbing him, the dragon flies for the nearby settlement and unleashes wanton destruction on them. We're talking houses burning, people running, that one long camera shot of a baby sitting alone in the middle of a street, screaming as everything burns around them. Total devastation.
From his high hall, Beowulf is woken by the screams and the roars of the fires to see what is happening to his people. This is it. His time has come. Time to be Beowulf one last time.
He hastily arms himself for battle. Using loud noises and shiny swords, they distract the dragon and lure him into a large open field. As the dragon approaches, fear gets the better of Beowulf's men and they run, leaving him standing there alone to face the beast. If this is how Beowulf is to die, he will meet his death well and he will take the dragon with him.
An epic man versus dragon fight ensues. Beowulf's speed and strength totally at odds with his white hair and wrinkled skin, his muscles remembering their moves from battles long past, the same bloodlust that made him hang on tightly to the arm of Grendel surfacing once more.
Seeing his king fighting so valiantly, one man and a relative of Beowulf's, called Wiglaf, turns and runs back into the battle, refusing to let his king and kinsman stand alone.
The dragon proves no match for the both of them, and Beowulf is able to deal a fatal blow. But, before the dragon breathes its last, it draws on its final reserve of strength and lashes out with its fearsome jaws, catching Beowulf on the neck.
As the creature slumps, finally dead, Wiglaf lets out a cheer of triumph and turns towards his incredible king, stopping dead as he sees Beowulf collapse.
The thing about dragons, aside from the fire and the teeth and the claws and the tail, is this: they are venomous. All it took was a nick of the teeth breaking the skin on Beowulf's neck, and it was too late. The venom coursed through the great king's body, setting him on fire from within.
Wiglaf runs to the king, who asks him to help him get to the barrow where his treasure is buried. He wants to see what it is that has cost him his life, and hoping that it will be able to do some good for his people after he is gone. Wiglaf helps Beowulf get to the barrow, but with dismay, they see that much of the gold has become corroded and tarnished over time, making it useless. It's cursed gold.
He leans back into Wiglaf's arms, and, whispering his last instructions to the one man loyal to him unto death, Beowulf breathes his last. The great warrior and just king, Beowulf, is dead.
Panic spreads amongst the people. The dragon is dead, but who will now protect them from their enemies? But Wiglaf keeps his promise and finds the note, Beowulf's last wishes on how his body is to be dealt with.
A great funeral pyre is constructed and the king placed atop it. The fire burns all through the next day and night. When the embers finally die down, the people collect the remains of their great king and bury him in a huge barrow overlooking the sea, surrounded by treasure from their own hoards and the dragon's hoard that is now of no use to any living man, to create a burial mound such as has never been seen. The barrow stands, tall and imposing, as a reminder to enemies that will approach by land or sea, that even though his body is gone, the spirit of Beowulf guards his people still. So think twice before you try it.
That's pretty hardcore.
Yep. So nice tingly feeling at the end. It's like
Yeah.
Beowulf guards his people still.
So it's a pretty cool story, but what does it actually mean?
Many people have tried throughout the years to dissect and understand the story of Beowulf. Without having the original poem or the original creator here to examine, it's a bit of a fruitless exercise. But it doesn't stop people trying.
Yeah, but at its heart, it is an epic story of how bravery and strength can triumph over the forces of darkness. But it also shows that no matter how great someone is in life, death is inevitable. And all that matters in the end is how you faced it and the legacy that you leave.
One of the most notable scholars involved in the discussion of Beowulf and the various themes therein is none other than J.R.R. Tolkien himself, and the inspiration that this poem had on his own epic work is clear.
The style of the poem is typical of the oratory words at the time, and the opening line of
What? Or lo.
is a call by the bard, the storyteller, to attention. It's basically a, listen up, this gonna be good.
Yeah, and it's outside of the metre of the poem, so the poem always follows a metre, like a rhythm to it, but the what has no rhythm whatsoever, and that word is now translated into our modern language as what? Yeah. So if you want someone's attention, or not so much now, but more in the 1800s, someone would be saying something, they'd be like, huh, what? At the end of it. So it's basically saying, what? Listen up. I'm about to speak. Shush.
This gonna be good.
Then the poem begins.
Yep.
The main theme of the poem is the importance of legacy, or independent reputation. You can see this in the boast that Beowulf makes when challenged by Unferth. He's already famous, the people there already know who he is, but he still feels the need to boast about his great deeds anyway, to prove that he really is something to be seen, for the people around him to be inspired by, so that they fight with him against the monster. However, when it comes to the final battle, there is no boasting. There's no rousing of his men and they desert him, because for all his fame and glory to date, he is just a man and the danger is seen as too great. So whilst great deeds are all well and good, they can't always save you.
We see Beowulf mature as a character from a brave warrior with nothing to lose and everything to gain, to a wise and great just king who considers the welfare of his own people above his own name and reputation. You also see this in Hrothgar, who seeks help far and wide to protect his people, as that is what a king was meant to do.
There is a great focus on the old heroic code that would have been familiar to the original audience of the poem. To do great deeds, be hospitable in your home and hearth, be loyal to your men and your king, make sure that your name lives on. This code is what separates the good characters like Beowulf, who follow this code, from the monsters like Grendel, who don't, and who live on the fringes of society and are outsiders in every sense of the word. There's even some arguments that Grendel wasn't actually a monster. He was a person, like a human, who just happened to live on the outside of society and was therefore seen as a monster because he was different.
Yeah. This code, however, is at odds with the undercurrent of Christianity in the poem. As part of the heroic code, you win glory and honour, so as to get fame in this life, and that is only way that you can live forever, if your name is remembered. However, in Christianity, you achieve eternal life by living a good life in the service of God, so it has often been remarked how these two contrasting points seem to cause tension in the poem.
We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail of dissecting the poem, but we will put links to a few of our sources in the show notes, so that those who are interested could have a look into it. We'd also recommend obtaining a copy of the Tolkien translation, published posthumously by his son, and containing both his and his esteemed father's notes on the translation, as well as transcripts and notes from the lectures that Tolkien held during his time as a professor of Anglo-Saxon and Old English literature at Oxford University. It is very interesting reading, and isn't as overwhelmingly difficult as some academic texts can be to understand. Plus, you're basically getting a lecture from Tolkien. I mean, that's awesome.
That is pretty sick.
I sent Em a voice note when I found the book. I've got the Kindle version, and I do intend to get the actual book version at some point, but I just remember how excited I was that I was nearly crying in the voice note to you. I was like, oh my god, Tolkien did it! Oh my god!
Yeah. I mean, you'd like to think that she wouldn't be like that, but she actually was. She had to, calm herself down.
Yeah, genuinely.
In everything.
Yeah, it was epic. It's the small things, you know?
Yeah. So, Beowulf. Done. Tick.
Woo! What did you think of it?
It's cool. I mean, it very much is like the old... I would say it's kind of like... You know, you have, the old wives' tales?
Yeah.
Well, the kind of stories you'd tell your sons when they're in bed to just be like, he was a great person, he had his flaws, and he also realised what was important.
Yeah.
At the end, which is what it's true.
It's how this is how you should act.
Yeah.
This is what you should do to be great. This is what needs. But also, the opening lines are like, lo, how we hear the stories of the great sword Danes and their princes, and that's what the word Etheling means. It means prince, and it's just it's talking about. We remember these stories, remember how great these people were. Look back at how great we once were as a people. And how great we can be again if we live by these codes.
Yeah. I think it's a fun story.
Yeah. There's lots and lots of versions of it. There's translations into prose. I think Michael Morpurgo has done a version of a translation into prose. Every translation is going to be slightly different because it depends on the context of the words that you're reading. And... it's good to have a different version of it, but also, if you're not into reading old poems or translations, as some people aren't, there are two fantastic film versions. There is the animated film version, which has Ray Winstone in, which does take a couple of liberties with the story, and it plays on the fact that Grendel would not hurt Hrothgar, and it actually uses that, it explains that by saying that Hrothgar is Grendel's father.
Yeah.
So, Hrothgar was Grendel's father, he abandoned him, Grendel was angry at this. He then fights back, and then Grendel's mother comes and attacks and blah blah blah, and Hrothgar dies. Beowulf takes over Denmark instead, but he sleeps with somebody, and the dragon is his son. So it's this never-ending cycle of who is the actual monster here? Is it the monster that is trying to live and is being tortured by all this noise, or is it the father who abandons their child and treats them as a monster? So yeah, it's this whole thing of who is the man, who is the monster. That's a really good version. There is also the story Beowulf and Grendel, which has Gerard Butler as Beowulf.
Ooh.
which is a lot more true to the poems, but it's very, very good. There are still some artistic
But
licenses.
he looks fit.
He does. He very much looks the part, like long hair, beard, Viking-y, etc.
Nice.
There was also, I think it's a BBC series called Beowulf Into the Shieldlands, which takes a lot of liberties, but it's still fun. It's fun. It's cool. It's kind of like Merlin or Troy or the Three Musketeers. It's like, it's not going to be true to the book, but it's still fun.
But I guess as it's not a true story, it can have different artistic licenses and all that jazz.
But it's the fact that over 1,000 years on, we still know it. We still know the story. We can still see it. It's pretty damn cool. Yeah. See, that's a good way to get your name to live on. Not actually being the hero in the story, but being the one who tells the story. Because even though we don't know who it was, that person's words are still with us. I'm sorry, did I just scratch your leg?
No, I have really bad pins and needles and you just kicked my foot.
I'm so sorry.
Oh.
Breathe.
So...
Do you want to breathe whilst I do the next bit?
Yes, please.
Okay. We're going now to our ridiculous death. We're going back to the Anglo-Saxon period, to a time where the story of Beowulf would have been in circulation and Old English was widely spoken.
Yep.
From 990 to 1016 CE, Edmund Ironside ruled as King of England. He was son of Ethelred the Unready and Queen Elthgifu of York. He was given the moniker of Ironside because of his valour in battle, whilst fighting the war that his father kindly left to him against the invading army of Danish King Canute the Great.
So we have Ethelred the Unready, Edmund Ironside, and Canute the Great.
Yeah, and Elthgifu.
I can't, but she didn't have a the after her.
She was a woman, she wouldn't be allowed to have a the after her.
She just had the baby.
Yeah, she did the thing.
Alcafruda had the baby.
Yep.
Fab.
Elthgifu. Sorry, my laptop just decided to make a noise.
I mean, it's been like over an hour, man.
He just wanted to be heard. Anyway, Edmund wasn't supposed to be king from his birth, but his two older brothers died, so he took the throne.
Oh, he was third in line.
Yep, he was third in line. The location of Edmund's death is disputed, but the best record of it comes from Henry of Huntingdon and Geoffrey Gamer. So no one, I think it's like, some people say it was Cambridge, some people say it was London, we're not entirely sure.
But he died.
Yeah. Edmund was king, sure, but he still had his fair share of enemies, and the best way to get rid of an enemy is by hiring an assassin. Assassins are usually good at their jobs, and are willing to lie in wait pretty much anywhere to get the job done. One day, going about his daily life, King Edmund Ironside was hit with the same need that we all get, and popped to the privy to relieve himself.
Poop.
While sitting down to wow. While sitting down to do his business, the assassin struck. Stories differ as to whether it was a spear, a sword, or a crossbow used, but the idea is that the assassin had approached the fortification, climbed up through the chute that is attached to the privy seat, and lay in wait. When the king was sitting comfortably, the assassin took aim and did his job. Right through the butt. Edmund Ironside is buried at Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset, though the abbey and his tomb were destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, so nobody knows exactly where he now lies. But one thing's for sure, they wouldn't have been able to bury him sitting up.
Oh, right. I'm going to say it now. I think I'd rather a spear or a sword. Because imagine the
Yeah.
of a crossbow.
You'd know it'd hit you and you'd be like, oh. And you wouldn't be able to move.
But I guess if you fire a crossbow, that would just go a lot further up because of the projection.
Yeah. But also, props to the assassin for sitting in wait in the toilet for however long it took, and however many people would have used the privy beforehand until, Edmund walked in and went, I am King Edmund Ironside and I am about to poop.
But he probably didn't do that. He probably had his own toilet.
He probably had his
Otherwise,
own,
the assassin wouldn't know. Because I'm pretty sure he doesn't have, King Edmund tattooed on his ass.
Well, no.
And it'd be quite dark when he sat on the hole. How would the assassin know?
It's like, you know what? That looks like a royal butt to me. that looks like a bottom that has sat on a throne for a long period of time. I can clearly see the piles forming. This is the guy. Up she goes.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh, these ridiculous deaths kill me.
Pardon the pun. Yeah. So,
Oh,
Yeah, next time you go to the toilet, just check inside.
make sure
I
there's
mean-
no deadly assassin in a crossbow.
Yeah. I think that'd be a cool name for like a kids' book, The Assassin in the U-Bend. If you are a plumber and have ever found remains of an assassination organisation or guild in a U-Bend, please write to us and let us know.
Oh, so that's our ridiculous death, and that's the end of our Beowulf episode. That was requested from one of our lovely listeners in the United States. If you have any requests for any other shows, please get in touch. We have our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at Just a Cup of History. And then our email address, which is acupofhistory@outlook.com.
Yes.
Message us anywhere, requests, let us know, part of history, or just say, hey, I'm from this place, what can you tell me about it? And we can do that as well, like we did Bogota before, the capital of Colombia, and we've done other places. It doesn't have to be a big event or a person or whatever. But yeah, get in touch, we want to hear from you.
Just before you go, have you got your own epic hero in need of a reward? Think that arm rings and silver chalices are so last raiding season? Why not pay a visit to Thimble and Kiss? Bespoke and personalised gifts for all your pillaging needs. There's no better way to tell that avenging warrior in your life that you value them than something that nobody else has. Thimble and Kiss, for something unique and wonderful, just like you are. Check in our show notes for the link.
And we will speak with you in a fortnight's time.
Bye.
Bye!